Hey y'all, Andrew Mack here, and this is Loblolly Press and Conversation. We're getting this one out a couple of days late. I just got back from a quick trip to New York to visit some friends, and I just needed a minute to land, so thanks for your patience. Before we get into the episode, a couple of quick things. My new chapbook, Beasts of Chase, is out now. It's actually a poetic retelling of black bear hunting in Appalachia, something between history, myth, filtered through wilderness and reckoning. I think you'll really love it. It's $10 at loblollypress.com. I hope you'll pick up a copy. If you're local, we've got 2 events this week, and I hope you'll come out. Thursday, April 11th at 7 p.m., The Dark City Speaks at the Black Mountain Center for the Arts. It is ticketed, and tickets are $10, so be sure to sign up ahead of time. But it's sure to be an incredible evening. It's featuring Glennis Redman, Lee Stockdale, Mildred Baria, and poets from the Dark City Poet Society, including me. So I'd love to see you there. On Saturday, April 12th at 3 p.m., we have a really exciting event planned with City Lights Bookstore in Silva. We'll be reading along with other Loblolly poets. So Cheryl Whitehead will be there, Clint Bowman, Garrett Ashley, and I'll also be reading there too. All right, on to today's episode. We recorded this one in Clint Bowman's home in Black Mountain, surrounded by overflowing bookshelves, Sharpies, sticky notes, and the comforting chaos of a home office. Our conversation meanders as conversations between friends often do. We talk about dogs, Penny and Hugo are officially besties, about our partners, shout out to Garrison and B, and about what it means to write as a local, not just about a place, but from inside of it. We dig into what it means to be acknowledged by your peers, to build a literary community from the ground up, and how Loblolly Press fits into that wider effort. Clint reflects on the path to publishing this first full-length collection, If Lost, what surprised him along the way, what ultimately didn't make it into the final manuscript, and he shares generously about how poetry moved from the margins to the center of his life, and how he's working to make room for others to do the same. And let's get into it.
A lot of those outdoor programs were cleaning up the river. And now, since the storm, it seems like we just had a complete reset and it's worse than ever. And now we're like, oh, wow, we did all those cleanups seemingly for nothing. And
well, what are you going to clean? Like, you as individuals don't have the resources to clean
so
a river like that that's been completely destroyed, right?
not us alone, but there is a process in place. And so right now, literally today, the Army Corps of Engineers was out at our parks in Black Mountain. They're cleaning up the big items and picking up the stuff that we literally just can't lift up with our own arms.
Yeah.
And so they're getting all the big stuff out, like bridges, like huge infrastructure that's just washed down the river. They're getting all that up. And then I'm partnering with a lot of local organizations to make it more of a community-wide effort to get a lot of people out on certain days to clean up all the small pieces of trash in between. And so we're going to have a lot of cleanups this spring.
I mean, I drove through Swannanoa on the way here, and Garrison was in the car with me. And I think because he was with me and because it was one of the first times I'd driven through in the daytime since the hurricane, it is still very visually striking.
Oh, yeah.
Like the damage that has especially happened just right alongside the river.
Yeah.
How does that affect your daily life? Does it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's depressing to drive through there. I mean, it's hard to know what a place used to look like and then drive through it and it's completely different. And you know that it's not going to be the same ever again, or it's going to take a long time for any sort of normalcy to return to that area in particular. But it is also uplifting to know that in Swannanoa in particular, they're doing weekly cleanups. So if you saw any bags of trash, like they're doing a big community effort and they want to get the community rebuilt. And we had a really, B and I had a really interesting interaction in Swannanoa 2 weekends ago. One of the first businesses to reopen was Good Company Pizza in Swannanoa, this pizza place. And we went in there and the lady that was working, who I didn't really know that well, but B knew, she was like, oh, I got to show you guys something. And she like pulled us into the dining room and one of my blackout poems was on the wall in the dining room. And I was like, that is crazy. Cause we went and had pizza there all the time before the hurricane hit. So that it was really nice to see that they had reopened and they're rebuilding, and a piece of my art is in there, and it feels like, I don't know, things are going to get better.
How did they get that piece of art and put it up on the wall?
So the lady that works there had purchased it at Badcraft years ago, and she was like, I thought it would just be a great piece to have in here. And it's on like almost like a gallery type wall, but they have a theme in there. It's really cool, of like just old vintage movies. And so they have like vintage movies playing, and they have all these old posters, but then there was this kind of gallery wall of different types of art kind of pieced together. And right in the middle was one of my blackout poems among all these old photos and stuff. And it felt really nice to see where it ended up, because I haven't done blackout poems in a long time.
Did she know that it was yours?
Yeah.
Okay, so when she knew.
Yeah, she purchased it at Badcraft, which is the only place really that I sold those. And yeah, she knew that it was mine. I guess that was nice. Yeah.
How does it feel to be around town? Because you're in Black Mountain. You're pretty well known around town, it seems like, either through your recreation work or through your poetry. How does it feel to be around town and see your things on the wall or see representations of yourself?
Black Mountain's super small. So Swannanoa is even smaller. And so regardless of what you do, you're going to know everybody. And so you feel like now there's a lot more overlap. I feel like for a long time I was trying to keep my creative life and my professional job life separate. And now, especially when the book came out, the overlap was like those worlds just merged together.
Yep.
In ways where like all of the people who hike with me at recreation now are like, oh, I'm going to go out and buy your book. And like, I can't wait to read your book. I'm always kind of like cringe a little bit, because I don't talk to them in the same way that I feel like I write my poetry. And they're going to be like, oh, this is different, but they buy my book, or they bought my book, and they return. And so like they're still coming. So I do think it's heartwarming, to know a lot of people in town and to feel supported by a lot of people in town who I feel like at the end of the day just like that I'm continuing to follow a passion of mine while working a government job.
Yeah. I find that when I tell people I'm a poet, either at my job or outside of it, or that I've founded Loblolly Press, it's people really like to see you following things that bring you joy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it helps that my boss is super supportive. He purchased multiple blackout poems of my books, and he knows about poetry night at Dark City Poet Society. And, he's very supportive of that. And he knows that both of these endeavors, my job and my creative outlet, are both my dream. And I want to see them both through. Like, I love my job with the town. I love being able to hike for a living and get paid to do it, and then also get paid to write. I mean, it's a dream come true.
With that balance of things that you're kind of working with, you're doing writing, you've got your job, you're a husband, you have a dog. Do all those things pull? And actually, you probably have other roles if you want to share those too, but do those things pull against your poetry, or are they essential parts of it?
And they're definitely, I think everything in your life is an essential part of it. It's part of the creative process, and just the act of observing everything around you, and the variety of roles that you live in, and seeing your life from different perspectives in your own skin. It's different. I feel completely different facilitating a poetry night than I do being, at my family's house with my mom and dad, and I'm like their child. It's a completely different dynamic, and it feels different, and it feels weird to, I don't know, see your parents grow old and think about the future with them and what it means for you. And so yeah, I think it definitely plays a big role in my writing.
Famously, I know that I guess famously is the wrong word, but
I don't know if I've done anything famous.
I think what I'm trying to say is, like, because we know each other so well, I know that you're like writing at work and you're writing while you're hiking and you're also thinking about things while you're hiking. It's like we went on a hike together and, we both walked away with something to write a poem about. And I think of that experience and I'm like, it feels like poet is like primary role in your life. And I'm wondering how that.
Yeah. So I approach poetry and writing as like an essential part of just my daily routine. Cause I do feel like the creative process helps me just be a more productive human being, like in my job. So like I do write a lot when I'm hiking. I'll jot a lot of notes down on my phone. I'll jot notes down on my computer, like in between emails. And it's just like, it helps me become more productive because I feel like I'm not neglecting one over the other. I feel like I'm letting them coexist. And to me, that makes me feel more fulfilled in both of my dreams, really. I feel like I'm not, like, if I start neglecting one over the other, I start to feel depressed about it. I feel like I'm not doing enough, which is, I guess, weird to say because I feel like we all kind of struggle with not feeling like we're doing enough all the time.
Yeah.
But doing them together makes it feel like it's just a more cohesive effort.
I think that balance component of that, where you are seeing yourself as a poet, you're working kind of on that all the time. Maintaining the balance in other places actually is essential to be able to keep thinking about poetry. You have to be meeting like the needs of your family, the needs of your job.
Yeah.
And those things, at least for me, free me up to do the writing and they free me up to do the business. And those are all like essential parts of my lives. And if I don't make time for each of them, that's when I start to feel, like you said, kind of depressed. It's like when I start to imbalance that, then I feel kind of hopeless in each of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it's weird to have a metaphor here with sports, but I'm going to bring in some sports.
Boo. Well, what sport?
All sports. And so I guess I'm relating this back to like growing up, I only played really one sport, which was golf, a lot. And I focused way too much on golf. And then I read this study about how professional athletes, a lot of them were more successful because they played multiple sports and they had like this dynamic. And so focusing on one thing solely, I feel like does kind of drain all of your resources and ends up hurting you in the end. And so I do believe that like having all these different avenues that you have to live your life helps you in all of those categories, if that makes sense. Like having a wide variety of things going on helps in the long run.
Yeah. If poetry hadn't come into your life, who do you think you would be?
Oh, if poetry didn't come into my life, I feel like I would still be an artist of some sort. In high school, I miserably failed being a visual artist. But for a while, that was my goal. Like my high school art teacher was constantly telling me like, oh, you should just take my job whenever I retire. Like the timing's going to be right. You can go to college for this and be an art educator. And then by the time you're out of college, I'll be retiring and you can just take my job. And so for a while I was thinking, that would be a great opportunity, but I realized early on that I was not a good visual artist. It was a constant struggle for me and I did not feel confident in that at all. So I abandoned it.
The things that say no to us sometimes are actually, I think it's kind of comforting that those things say no. And you're like, well, that is actually just, I couldn't like put my mind to that and be better at it.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if it was for you or not, but it was definitely like late high school, early college where I feel like I faced most of those decisions of like hobbies and stuff where I was like, what am I doing? What benefit does this give me? Am I wanting to take it seriously or am I wasting time?
You take writing very seriously. I think one of the people in my life who take it the most seriously.
And that was a conscious effort, weirdly, when, and kind of related to the hobby thing, whenever I was doing a lot more hobbies than I am now. And I invited a friend to go rock climbing with me. And they said, I don't have time for that hobby, basically. That kind of opened my mind. I was like, wow, I need to focus my efforts on like what I want to achieve, what my goals are, and like just focus more time on it. And that's when I really shifted to devoting a lot of my like hobby time and like free time to just working on poetry as a craft. Not always writing poetry, but like reading, editing, and writing, like all three of them. And for a long time, I still feel like I lean towards just calling myself a writer, even though I only write poetry for the most part.
Why?
I don't know. I just feel like I had hesitancy, and maybe it's just because like I didn't feel like I deserved to say like, oh, I'm a poet, because like I didn't go to school for it. And so for the longest time, I was like, I don't want to tell people I'm a poet, because then they're going to think like, what credentials do you have to call yourself a poet? And so I don't think I really got to that point until I got involved with community poetry groups, and I got out of college. I was still just reading poetry. I had the pipe dream of just like submitting something.
Just one thing?
No, I had like a really small manuscript, I feel like, out of college that was so bad that.
How did you make that? How did you create that?
So in college, I used a few of my like extracurricular classes. Instead of taking super easy classes, I took some English classes, and I did a poetry class and a fiction class. And those were great. I learned a lot about poetry in the poetry class, obviously. But I learned a lot of what I know about poetry before I got into poetry groups. I learned a lot by just reading it. And so I started reading early off in high school, just poetry, because I'm not a fast reader. And so reading poetry was a more approachable way to like just reading literature in general, and like reading a full length book and being like, oh, I just finished a book, and it was a book of poetry. And so, yeah, out of high school, just kept reading. And then out of college, I formed the Pullman Poet Society at the High Point Arts Council. And then once I started working with other poets and reading a lot of other poets' works and reading my own, I felt like I was comfortable enough in my own style and my writing, which is something I never felt comfortable enough in visual art. And so whenever I was in those groups and, comparing my own work and being like, it's completely different, but I am confident enough to stand behind what I write. And it's like, it was the first time that I felt like I could do something like that in a very creative way.
I think we do have to convince ourselves that we have the authority to be able to say things about poetry or be a poet. I guess I've been to your house. You have a wall of books. I know that you read, before probably even writing one poem, you probably read so many books. So what was it within you that said, I guess I'm just not really a poet because I didn't go to school for it? When what I see is like someone who has read enough, has gone to school. We're learning by reading. What did you need to affirm that?
I think the validation. So like the publishing process for me is still a big validation point. Like, I try to get a lot of individual poems published, mm-hmm. and that's what I did before publishing both collections of my work, the chapbook and the full length. I always wanted to receive some sort of a validation, and I think a lot of writers look for that. Of just being like, hey, someone else has read my work and they like it enough to publish it. That's validating. And so I think it wasn't until I got probably my first poem or two published that I was like, okay, I can do this. I want to keep doing this. And I feel like I can become better and continue publishing individual poems and collect enough to put a full length collection together.
How did it feel when I reached out to you and I was like, I love your chapbook. I'm starting a press. I want you to be my first book. Do you have a full length? And it was an email. It was just a cold email.
Yeah.
We had met each other once, but it was kind of, you didn't know who I was, really.
Yeah. I mean, it felt awesome just because I didn't know you at all. And just to know that somebody else was out there that believed in my work was, once again, validating. I was like, this is great. You seem to really believe in my work and saw the vision that I had with it. And so yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better setup as far as like publishing my first book, and being able to see the creative process through and through. But no, yeah, it felt great.
I guess I was asking that because I think that validation of like someone you don't know saying that they like your work is so much different than someone you do know, which I think is good and bad. There is this part of me that's like, now that we are close and we're friends, like I actually do value your feedback on my work over just a random person's approval.
Yeah.
Okay, so you wrote a full-length book after your chapbook. So you wrote Pretty Shit, which is a chapbook. That's from Bottle Cap Press. That's where I didn't meet you that way, but that's where I first read your work. And then we worked on If Lost together. But when I spoke with you, the manuscript was ready in some ways. We worked on it a bit together, which we'll talk about. But now that it's out there in the world, do you feel changed by that in any way?
I feel changed in the sense that more people have become familiar with my work, and I've met, a lot of different people who I didn't know previously to publishing. So I feel different in that way, but I don't feel differently inside my head as far as the writing process goes.
Well, I was going to ask, has the publishing process and having a book out made you feel more confident in your work or more restless about it?
Man, that's tough. I think it's definitely made me feel more confident because I feel like that first one is a big one to get out. And a lot of people, it's hard to get out. And now that that's out there, I feel a little bit more comfortable going at like my own speed, if that makes sense. I feel like there's like a rush to get that first collection out there. You're like, if I haven't done that yet, then I haven't accomplished anything yet. And
I felt that way too.
Yeah. And so now that it's out there, it's like breathe a little bit, and then like I still haven't really fully committed to even thinking about like what the next project is. I mean, it's been half a year probably.
It's been 6 months since we published, but you were really done with If Lost, 3-4 months before that. So
yeah.
But I and this is no pressure. I think you the second collection will be there when it happens. I think you're writing poetry. I know you're writing because I hear it and we go to critique.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell us, though, kind of staying on the topic of If Lost, what did any part of your own book surprise you when you read it to yourself? Or like if you were to pick it up today and like flip to a poem, would any part of it surprise you?
A particular poem?
Well, I'm thinking not just a particular poem, but like any part of, I think of, sometimes I pick up my own book, I flip through and I'm like, man, I'm like not that person that wrote that, but I love it. Like I love that someone did.
Yeah.
But it could be any surprise you have when you look at it again.
I think the book itself, I get most surprised by just the overall like quality of the book, which is a testament to Loblolly. I'm always very pleased when I pick up a copy of the book, and the feel of it is great. I flip through it and it's the original, I guess, like thought behind the manuscript and how it evolved throughout the whole process. Whenever I look at it now, I'm very surprised by like all the ways that it grew over those months.
You think that when you're done writing the book, that's the end, but it's actually just the end of the first part.
Yeah.
Because there's the editing part that we did together.
Yeah.
And I do want to talk about that in just a second. But the other part of, even through the design of the book, I think that's something that's important to both of us. It's why we connect in that way, is like the way the book looked and it was laid out was so important to someone reading it and understanding what you were talking about. I mean, the book is called If Lost. If we didn't provide a guided way of reading the book that felt right, it would be like so antithetical to the whole point.
Yeah. I'm really happy with the steps and the way that the book is.
But that was your idea. The steps was your idea of like, you created this thematic. It was actually one of the things that made me say yes so fast, was I was like, oh, he's really thought about the overall manuscript. And because we receive a lot now. Back then we did not, but now we receive a lot of manuscripts, and that's one of the things I look for first, is like, do they have an overall vision for the project? Because if they don't, then sometimes it's just a lot of poems put in one place.
Yeah, and I feel like it's easy to just clump a lot of poems together and be like, oh, well, there it is. They're all standalone poems, and you can make any connections you want to. But whenever you actually start to piece them together and there is intent behind it, it makes it a whole lot more gratifying to bring it all together.
Also, we worked on the order of those poems for a long time. Like, the way that you gave it to me was not the order of the poems we got to.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to hear. There was a moment when there were a lot of story components to your collection.
Yeah.
With those story components, they obviously didn't make it into the end. And that was your decision in the end, actually. That was not a decision that I made for you. And I want to know what prompted you to make that decision.
Some of the story components, as far as like characters go.
Well, you can share more about tell us what story components I'm talking about. Even would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, so I really struggled with putting all the poems together and realizing that the subjects or the characters in the poems could be the same, but they weren't necessarily the same to begin with. But I realized that if I change some of the names of people or who the you is that I'm speaking to,
you could create cohesion.
I could create cohesion, and they could all be connected, and that drove me insane. But
it drove you.
I feel like it was worth it.
The urge to do it drove you insane?
I think the desire to do it drove me insane. And I think I got most of those connections there. There was zero connection before I showed you the manuscript.
There was connection, just not between the characters. There was connection in the sense of like those larger sections of the book led to something.
The themes connected.
The themes connected.
Yeah,
but the people did not connect. That's true.
And I wanted that. I don't know if it's just the artistic vision of wanting those like subliminal messages, like I want somebody to read it. It'd be cool for somebody to read it multiple times and then pick up on those things. It's like, it's definitely not something you would pick up on the first read. But I want to throw in those things in my writing that people can pick up after reading it multiple times.
Hey, it's me, Andrew Mack. You've been hearing my voice all along, but I wanted to take a quick break from my conversation with Clint to spotlight something really special because it's National Poetry Month and also launch month for Cheryl Whitehead's debut collection, Distant Relations, out now from Loblolly Press. In a wise and intimate debut, Cheryl's delving into the intricacies of family, memory, displacement, cultural heritage, and the longing to connect. Her poems introduce us to a cast of characters bound by blood but pulled apart by time, silence, and distance. It's lyrical, it's vivid, and it's emotionally unflinching. Writers like Annie Woodford call it a subtle lyric multiverse, and David Masello says Cheryl is a conjurer of place and time. You can grab your copy today at loblollypress.com. That's Distant Relations by Cheryl Whitehead. Now, back to Clint.
Erosion control. We were losing the ridge line to the dusk when you asked, what if I had stayed? 10 years is nothing to a mountain, unless you clear cut and gut it for someone else to move in. I've done that too many times, made my heart a gorge with a river everyone floats through. I looked at you and said it wouldn't have mattered, and you stared at me with eyes that looked so tired of trying to rebuild a rock slide.
One of the things I love the most about your poetry, and we talk about this as like one of your kind of stylistic hallmarks, is how declarative your statements are. A lot of them end with a period. Your lines don't really hedge things. They just exist. Mm-hmm. They come with this like certainty with them, but also they're always circling around uncertainty, especially with the you in that poem and kind of the emotional complexity there. Is that a voice that you had to work on, or was that something that's been natural for you?
No, that's definitely a voice I had to work on. So I think the certainty of my writing, or the certainty that I'm trying to achieve in my writing, definitely came from reading Triggering Town by Richard Hugo, the book. That is a kind of an intro to poetry course, like a college course. But Triggering Town was a book that was recommended to me by Thomas Dalbum, who reviewed the book, and gave me great advice by reading that. I had to go out and seek and find the book myself and read it and try to learn from it. But there's a lot of great tips in that book that the writer, Richard Hugo, is very honest with you about. These are things that work for me. They might not work for you. And one of the things that I found interesting is he does mention how being certain as a writer and not being uncertain, because you're in control of what you put down on the page. And so you should know to a certain extent of the message you're trying to convey. And so it does bother me now as a writer to read something and the writer is not sure of what's happening in the poem whenever you should be there. You should be directly telling the reader what you're seeing and how you're feeling and give them more guidance on what you're trying to achieve. Because if you're not sure where you're at and you're not sure what you're saying, then the reader's not going to be sure what you're saying either. They're going to be confused.
And I think sometimes people mistakenly think that poetry is all about questions. And actually it can be.
Yeah.
But I find the most unsatisfying poetry is when I know the poet doesn't know the answer. Or they don't even know what's going on.
Well, that was another point you made. It was like, if you ask a question, you better not answer it in your poem. Because if you have the answer to your question, just go ahead and put the answer down and don't even ask the question. There's little tips and tricks like that in there that are like these unspoken rules that are just written out very plainly that are like, oh yeah, that's what makes a poem good. And just putting it out in like short sentences that like you can easily understand of just things to avoid helped me a lot in writing. And that question one was one of the nuts and bolts, as he called it, of writing. Don't answer your own question.
You are so kind of articulate about the things that you've read in the past, and I wonder if memory plays any role in your poetry.
It factors in because I feel like I want to find the connections between those memories, and I want to. I don't want one memory to overload a poem. I want to find the connections and then find interesting ways that these two unrelated things are actually related. And so I've definitely taken a lot longer time, even though I write a lot and I write constantly. It takes longer for me to finish a poem now because I want to think about it more and I want to see where it goes outside of that one sole memory. I want to see how it relates to my everyday life, and if I can relate it to a more distant memory even, and think about how it plays into my life as a whole. Does that make sense? Yeah. So just thinking about it longer. In reading, memories that come from reading, those are inspirations, I guess, from other writers. I'll often read something and think about an image that I see in a poem, and then think about that image a lot. And it's a little less so, I think, with reading. It's more so about my own observations and memories in real life.
You run the Dark City Poet Society, or you co-founded it, but you primarily run it. And one of your key roles really as a participant in that is to be a part of the critique meetings that happen once a month, where people bring their own poem. They typically will read it, then they pass out a version of it like on a piece of paper to people in the group. And then they essentially read it and sit there and wait for feedback to come in from the group. How does that feeling play into what you just said about that feeling of not wanting to nitpick a poem or find all the poetic devices within it and kind of point those out?
So I guess as far as nitpicking a poem, whenever I give critiques on a poem, I don't focus on the subject and the overall meaning of the poem itself as much, because that's so open to interpretation. And honestly, the better the poem is, the more interpretations you're going to have about that poem. And so oftentimes during critique meetings, we'll go down these rabbit holes of what the meaning of this line is or that line I feel like we get off track when we do that. And so oftentimes the feedback that I do give is the smaller poetic elements to tighten up the poem and getting rid of some unnecessary articles. And it's the small things that seem irrelevant or seem trivial, but they're the most important because that's what takes away, in my opinion, the quality of the poem. If you're having these long run-on sentences or you have these articles and cliches everywhere that you're not seeing, it's most beneficial to take those out and realize it.
Isn't that the secret, though, that we all write those things? It's like the greatest poets write that nonsense into their first drafts. The best poets are the ones who sit and prune and prune and prune at their work. A lot of what you do is observing, writing it down, creating the poem, and then just editing. What's that process like with you? Where is it you've written the poem and now is it time for you to sit with it for a while? Is it time for you to send it out? How do you make those decisions?
So I'm still learning on this front. I'm still trying to figure out how to write now without editing in the process. And I don't want to, because you don't want to stifle the free write process where you're wanting to get everything down. But with the editing mind right there, I might be editing a poem and then start writing a poem, and I start thinking about the editing while I'm writing, and it hinders me a little bit. And so it slows me down, and I'm not ready to share a poem until I read it multiple times and I feel moved by it. If I don't feel any movement going on, it's not stirring anything within me, then it's one of those poems that I'm just probably never going to take out of the notebook. It's just going to stay there.
How do you evolve stylistically over time? Or do you feel like you found kind of your niche of the way you write and that's the way you appreciate writing?
Right now, I definitely feel like I've developed a certain style and voice in my writing, and I don't want to completely abandon that, but I do feel like it kind of boxes me in a little bit.
That's what I was thinking.
And so, yeah. So right now I do create poems and I put it into that style and form and voice that I'm most confident and comfortable with.
Which is
very to the point and certain, but leaves room for interpretation, allowing the reader to make connections that aren't necessarily the connections that inspired my poem, but they can relate to themselves, if that makes sense, of creating a scene that I know where I am at in the poem, but I also want the reader to know where they're at in the poem. And so it does create, like you said, like the one page. I usually keep poems short, I do believe. From the very get-go, I was drawn to poetry because of the brevity of it. And that's just the way I write because I like poems like that. I'm not saying I don't appreciate epics, but like it's hard to read a long poem and relate it to Homer these days. I mean, it's hard. If I want to read something long, I'm going to be reading a novel. And because I feel like the longer poems too tend to get into this rhyme schemes and these structures that I feel like are distracting from the message you're trying to tell.
Yeah. Your poems are very structured, but they don't rely on rhyme scheme or really like, I'd say like standard poetic forms or stanzas.
No, they don't. Yeah, they're pretty free verse. And I try to keep the rhymes to a minimum in a surprising way that doesn't feel too forced. But I don't rhyme a lot. Kind of cringe a little bit if they rhyme too much.
Can you read something from If Lost that speaks to how you feel about the world around you?
That's a good one. How I feel about the world around me. I feel like there's a theme in If Lost, and it's also a theme that I'm still exploring with my writing that tries to connect human struggle to environmental struggle. And I still feel that because I feel like we're, especially right now in the current times with the federal government cutting a lot of jobs in the environmental sector.
I even think about how Asheville never expected a hurricane to hit in a way that it destroyed our communities all around Western North Carolina, in the cities that both you and I live in.
Yep.
And in a way, I understood what had happened as a natural event.
Yeah.
And that we just as a society were not prepared for that. It's horrific. It's awful.
Oh yeah, it's terrible. It's happened before though.
Right. And I think I found some kind of I found a lot more material in asking the question of who showed up for each other in that time period as people. And I found that the government is not the people. They are not the people that showed up for us. It was that people in my apartment complex or you, and checking in on our people here.
I think your neighbors are the immediate help, but I go back to the federal government. I mean, FEMA is there, just from what I've experienced with the town of White Mountain. They are working with us. They kind of have to work with us. I mean, the rebuilding process they're in it for the long run, but you don't think about the long run when you're in survival mode. You're thinking about who's bringing me water, gas, and food.
I mean, it's odd, but it is 6 months later, and I still feel like we're now reaching the long run period where it's like,
yeah. And like I had mentioned, just today, the Army Corps of Engineers was in our parks 6 months later. Those things have been sitting there for 6 months. We also have to understand natural disasters are becoming more and more frequent, and there's only so many resources they can send to each area. I mean, I'm not completely defending FEMA here and everything that has happened, but you also have to extend a bit of grace and realize that it's near impossible to help everybody. And now you have the LA fires going on that was devastated even more in a whole different way, with fire compared to water. And it's wild to wrap your head around. But
I think that's why it's interesting. As a poet, you write about this duality that you're talking about right now. So I think it's interesting to think about how you write about so much beauty, and also it is sitting within the tension of destruction and I can't think of the word, destruction and chaos in some ways.
With my writing?
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, I don't know if it was just working in the environment and doing river cleanups and realizing how much we already abuse nature. To me, it's no surprise that it sounds terrible, but nature abuses us back in a lot of ways, and we're surprised by it. And it's like, well, we treat the world like shit, and we expect it to love us in return. It's not happening. I mean, nature's going to do what it wants to do, no matter what you do. But Helene caught everyone off guard. I was completely surprised. I mean, even if it was 1,000-year flood, when you think about the timeline of Earth, that's happened 1,000 times. It's just worse because this is the first time we've lived in these valleys, and we have these impervious surfaces where water has nowhere to go, and it makes it even worse.
I think you should read the last poem. I think you should read If Lost.
I'll read If Lost. I feel like it is one of those where realizing nature's perspective of you, and just, it's not all happy-go-lucky, but recognizing that we're in this together, and you have to respect nature for it to respect you. And there's only so much you can do individually without having to without feeling completely helpless on the government front. We can't control all that. But anyway, this is If Lost. Look around, establish your bearings. Take note of the scratched hemlock where the trail turns south. Don't rely on wives' tales or the growing patterns of moss. Notice nature warn itself of your intrusion. That warbler isn't singing to you. It's alerting the bear around the bend. Know your way out so you can tell someone lost one day. Go downhill if disarrayed. Act like water. Don't be afraid. Yeah.
That's it.
That's it.
Thanks so much for listening to Loblolly Press and Conversation. This episode was produced, edited, and mastered by me, Andrew Mack, from my home in Asheville, North Carolina. Loblolly Press is dedicated to amplifying emerging voices from the American South with a focus on queer, BIPOC, and rural writers. To learn more about our books, writers, and upcoming projects, visit loblollypress.com and subscribe to our newsletter at loblollypress.substack.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at loblolly_press for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and more. If you enjoyed this episode, please do consider leaving a review of it or sharing it with a friend. It helps us reach more listeners and support the writers we love. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.